They say the universe whispers. They never tell you what it feels like when the whisper swells and every human instrument goes mute at once, when the sun flares across our line of sight, and the feeds stutter and the graphs flatline, and the last thing you see is a green spark slipping through the inner system like a secret. You learn in that moment that silence can roar. If you wanted to hide a visitor from an entire world, you'd choreograph it exactly like this. Pick a date when the sun will sit like a king in the doorway, arm outstretched, palm up, stop. Choose a week when the largest science publisher on Earth is captive to politics, when public portals show placeholders and apologies and the rotating wheel of weight. Then send the traveler on a line that kisses Mars and cuts Earth out. Give it a color that dares the eye. Give it speed that laughs at our schedules. Call it 31 Atlas, as if a name could hold something that does not intend to stay. The hook isn't only in the spectacle but in the timing. October 3rd, 2025. Solar elongation from Earth, below 10 degrees. From Mars, broad and generous, a clean view across the black. On paper, this is geometry. In practice, it is fate. Earth steps to the wrong spot on the dance floor, and the sun, proud and bright, blocks the move we trained a century to make. Mars, a smaller partner with quieter music, is perfectly placed. The red planet becomes the only watchtower that matters. The rest of us are told politely to wait. At 30 million kilometers from Mars, 31 Atlas is a green ember too fast for comfort. It does not loiter. It does not circle. It is a curve that won't close, a hyperbola written with a confident hand, an object whose eccentricity has already decided it does not belong here. Interstellar. Unbound. Not a tourist. A passerby who never promised us anything. The irony bites. NASA's public sites flicker and stall. Observatory control rooms dim their screens rather than risk an unguarded glance at the sun. The line between caution and paralysis is thin in that glare, and for good reason. One careless command and a sensor dies, so the shutters stay shut. Schedules dissolve. The chat windows fill with apologies typed by people who would gladly work for free if it would change the angle of the planets. But angles don't bargain. They happen, and you keep up or you don't. Mars keeps up. The orbiters were built for other jobs. They were meant to read thin air and map rusted rock and count ice in polar shadows, not hunt interstellar ghosts against the darkness. But a spacecraft is a promise you make to curiosity, and promises bend before they break. The European Space Agency's Mars Express slews with a patience learned from 1,000 careful maneuvers. Its Omega spectrometer opens a narrow throat to the sky and swallows light by the micrometer. The ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, the great seam ripper of spectra, threads the green glow into 1,000 neat stitches of wavelength. The United Arab Emirates Hope Orbiter, young and nimble, widens its gaze and listens where ultraviolet sings. Tianwen-1 tilts its instruments, draws heat maps from cold space, and checks the edges of the emerald for seams. Each motion is a surrender of comfort. Each exposure is an argument with time. On the ground, improvisation becomes religion. The cadence of a normal mission, propose, review, simulate, uplink, is compressed until it sounds like a heartbeat heard through a wall. Slew budgets are counted like breaths. Star trackers lock on and let go and lock on again, drinking guide stars that slide across their fields like eel-slick coins. The thermal officers read graphs like fortune tellers. The telecoms people monitor a link budget as delicate as sleep. Everyone knows they are borrowing from tomorrow to buy tonight. Everyone pays anyway. What they see at first is a rumor with edges, a smear that resolves into a wedge that resolves into a geometry that should not exist in polite company. A sunward anti-tail. Textbooks teach you that tails run from the sun. They also teach you the footnote. Under certain viewing angles with large slow grains, a fan can point toward the light like a dare. 31 Atlas dares. The wedge holds. You can trace faint shells within it, concentric arcs that look like someone dropped pebbles into the vacuum and forgot about them. The arcs expand, but their spacing stays true. In a universe that loves turbulence, it is unsettling to see anything hold its shape this well. Then comes the last glimpse from Earth, the Namibia portrait taken before the curtain slammed shut. Under a southern sky, with the seeing steady the way it gets on the best nights, an amateur observatory lined up the world and found the visitor. The image was not a headline, it was a baseline. 700,000 kilometers of emerald coma, the light of diatomic carbon singing the same note it has always sung for comets, only loud, only clean, only composed. Amateur is a misnomer when the work is this careful. The frame traveled the world in private channels and public threads the way good news still can. Velocity does not care how you feel. Long-period comets drift in at 20 or 30 kilometers per second. Here the numbers double and stay doubled. Near Mars, near 60. At perihelion, predictions pin it near 68. That is blade speed. At that pace, outgassing would modulate brightness. Spin would draw a curtain of change across the light curve. Instead, the flux is flat, a quiet plateau that feels less like chaos and more like a habit. If there are jets, they hide. If there is tumble, it is too well behaved to announce itself. 9 minutes of Martian sky. That is all Perseverance steals from its plan. 9 minutes of looking up instead of down. Pascamzet tallies its exposures like indifferent timepieces. Later, humans make the minutes meaningful. They flatten the field and subtract the dark and clip the sigma and align the frames with spice kernels like carpenters squaring lumber. What remains is a line. You can lay a ruler along it. You can measure the sky rate and direction and, without romance, discover that the line is where the ephemeris expected a stranger to be. People argue on message boards about whether a rover can really see something like this. The rover, being a machine, doesn't argue. It saw what it saw. It wrote it down. It sent it home. Home was busy being quiet. A shutdown is not the same as a sleep. Inside the institutions that own the machines, people still watched, still checked, still kept health in the green. They could not say much. Outside those walls, independent analysts did what they always do when official channels clog. They mirrored, they scraped, they stacked. Side-by-sides bloomed. Timing fits sharpened. The world did not have a press conference. It had 1,000 small ones conducted in comments and code and low-res thumbnails. And then the sun threw a punch. A coronal mass ejection unspooled from our star like a ragged banner and marched outward. Comets are supposed to flinch. Yon tails are supposed to writhe under the slap of charged particles. Brightness is supposed to misbehave, if only for a little while. The Mars orbiters braced, ran their cadences, and watched as the visitor paid the storm approximately no attention at all. The coma stayed crisp. The arcs kept their spacing like disciplined soldiers. You can interpret that 10 ways without invoking anything exotic. Big grains, unusual chemistry, poor coupling, plain old bad luck in instrument timing. You can also admit that when a thing refuses to react, it feels like intent, and then promise yourself not to say that out loud. Composition hides where calibration lives. Early spectra leaned carbon-rich and water-shy, at least relative to solar system comets. Polarization pointed to large particles, the kind that hang like lanterns in a slow current. Infrared hinted at colder surfaces than felt fair at that distance. You line these facts up and they do not form a parade. They form a puzzle strewn across a table by someone who refused to include the corner pieces. Every serious theory that keeps a straight face has to explain 3 things: why the wedge points sunward so well, why the shells hold their geometry, and why the solar storm earned a shrug. It is easy to explain one. It is hard to explain all 3 at once without borrowing trouble. Across agencies, across languages, across policy silences, a rhythm took shape. Downlink windows hit like metronomes. Telemetry bloomed. Level 0 turned into Level 1, raw into calibrated. FITS files acquired headers like armor. Thumbnails gave way to gigabytes. There were delays you could blame on the shutdown, and delays you could blame on physics, and delays you could blame on the fact that everything worth doing takes longer than you wish. There was also speed where it mattered. Teams broke their own records for turning photons into plots because the sky was moving and would not wait. The strangest feeling, reported quietly by more than a few, was this: relief. Not because the object behaved, but because it didn't misbehave in the way fear predicted. No sudden disintegration, no hardware meltdowns, no unplanned safing events, just the brittle thrill of walking a tightrope without wind. Later, they would say they had expected more drama. They would also say that a lack of drama is the sweetest drama there is when you are responsible for a machine 100 million kilometers away. Meanwhile, the world built myths. Some were harmless poetry, a shard of a distant ice ocean, a messenger with nothing to say but its own presence. Others were noisier. You could watch the same few words appear and vanish in posts and streams as if typed by a ghost. Engineered. Probe. Test. Extraordinary claims do not care that you want them to be true. They require evidence, and evidence is stubbornly slow. Good scientists wrote drafts of papers with the ordinary explanation spelled out, and the extraordinary ones removed line by line like splinters. Good editors rejected cute sentences that reached too far. The discipline looked like dryness from the outside. From the inside, it felt like love. By early November, juice took a turn. Far away, wrong geometry, bad signal to noise, but with instruments that could still taste a hint of emerald across the black. The detections were whispers. They stretched the timeline like a musician bending a note. Outbound, the brightness curve sloped the way distance says it should. There were no late flares, no final tantrums. 31 Atlas declined with dignity and left our star the way it arrived, in a hurry. All through this, the best of the work happened in rooms no one films. Rooms where whiteboards wear battle scars of half-erased equations, and the one good marker left squeaks through a critical uncertainty. Rooms where a graduate student stares at a residual plot and decides not to massage it into compliance. Rooms where a principal investigator writes a paragraph that refuses to glow and keeps it, because clarity is a virtue and glow is a vice. Rooms where an engineer decides not to approve an aggressive slew, because the hardware is more important than one more frame. These are not acts of cowardice. They are acts of faith in a future in which the instrument still exists to take another shot. If this sounds like a sermon on patience, it is, but not a dull one. There's nothing dull about swearing. Softly at a cloud server at 2 a.m. while a satellite the size of a bus listens to you from Mars there is nothing dull about watching your code. Turn noise into a line and actually knowing, that the universe kept an appointment with your math. There is nothing dull about the quiet courage it takes to tell a colleague, I think we got it wrong, and then staying in the chair until you can say, we fixed it. What did we learn after the dust settled? Enough to publish, not enough to shrug. Interstellar unbound low-inclination path. Emerald coma dominated by diatomic carbon. Sunward wedge consistent with a geometry of slow large grains. Layered shells that persisted longer than standard models suggest. No convincing ion tail despite a CME. Water present but not proud. Thermal behavior more polite than expected. A nucleus likely on the order of kilometers, 5 perhaps, give or take a humility tax. None of that is a headline in isolation. Together, it is a fingerprint we have never seen before, and will probably not see again in exactly the same way. And yet the most important line in every paper will not be in the abstract. It will hide in the methods, the coordination that made the detection possible. Earth was blind. Mars lent us sight. Instruments built for one purpose were coaxed into another. Pipelines meant for weather learned to sing in vacuum. Archives opened. Amateurs mirrored. Forums became ad hoc peer review. It is fashionable to say that humanity cannot work together. The data say otherwise, if only for 6 weeks. Sometimes fate hands you the wrong sky and you find another angle. This is a story about a comet that might not be a comet in the way we teach the word, but it is more a story about us, about what a species does when an opening appears. We did not waste it. We argued like professionals and doubted like saints. We made room for luck. We stood back from the cliff edge of certainty and let the numbers walk us forward instead. That is not a small thing in an age that rewards speed over sense. Imagine the outbound now. The green dims. The shells blur into a suggestion. The wedge loses its knife edge and softens to a smudge that older eyes would miss. Beyond the orbit of Jupiter, beyond the routes plied by our mechanical pilgrims, 31 Atlas re-enters the same darkness that brought it to us. It does not wave. It does not look back. Objects do not. That's our job. We look back to the week when the sun blinded us and a smaller world offered its gaze, and we try to remember how it felt to borrow eyes. There will be another. Not soon. Not on schedule, but soon enough if you sit with your instruments long enough. It will arrive when the calendar is full of other urgencies and the politics are unhelpful, and the angles are cruel. It will ask the same question every visitor asks without meaning to. Are you ready? The only honest answer is never and yes. Never, because readiness for the unknown is a contradiction. Yes, because what else is the point of building quiet, patient machines and launching them into a silence that roars? So keep the checklist sharp. Keep the pipelines clean. Keep the budgets honest and the thresholds conservative and the imaginations warm. Keep the amateurs close, they find the edges first. Keep the line between caution and paralysis visible and move it with care. Keep your best marker capped, so it doesn't dry out before the meeting that matters. Keep a space in your mind for a wedge of light that points the wrong way. and for shells that stay too crisp, and for a storm that passes without a flinch. Keep a space for the possibility that the universe is not only stranger than you imagine, but also more patient. We were blind. We borrowed sight. We were muted. We let the numbers speak. We were locked out. We found a door on another world. 31 Atlas did not perform for us. It simply followed its private logic past our sun and through our brief attention, and yet by refusing drama, it forced us to find discipline. By refusing explanation, it forced us to collaborate. By refusing to stay, it forced us to hurry without rushing. If you're listening for the moral, it is not hidden. The cosmos does not schedule revelations. It only opens windows. Sometimes those windows are in someone else's house. That's fine, knock, borrow the view. Leave it better than you found it. When histories summarize this moment, they will be tempted to assign cleverness to the object, to pretend it knew to arrive during a shutdown and a conjunction. That story is cute and wrong. What happened was simpler and more impressive. Blind chance built a trap. We stepped into it, and instead of cursing, we built a bridge out of our own machines. The quiet heroics were not in catching a green ember with Mars-side cameras. They were in the refusal to turn spectacle into certainty. They were in the sentence, "We don't know yet," spoken clearly and without shame. And that is the truth of it. We don't know yet. We know enough to know that we don't. In science, that is not a defeat. It is a horizon. It is the line you walk toward. One careful step at a time. Instruments humming, servers blinking. People arguing gently at 3 in the morning over whether a flat line is flat enough to be called flat. Atlas is gone. The silence remains. It is not empty. It is crowded with work to do. Listen. The whisper has started again. It always does. Maybe this time the angle will be ours. Maybe not. Either way, we will be ready to borrow the view. There is a woman in Madrid who has stared at the same 3 lines of code for so long that the screen's afterimage follows her when she blinks. She wrote the routine months ago for atmospheric dust retrievals. Tonight it becomes a comet detector. She adds a guard against saturation, a tolerance for off-axis stars, and a ruthless little clause that refuses to declare a detection unless the motion vectors remain coherent across 4 consecutive frames. When the routine turns a noisy patch into a quiet line, she doesn't shout. She exhales, then runs it again. The second result is uglier, which is to say it is believable. There is a man in Dubai who keeps an old telescope catalog under his keyboard like a talisman. He joined the Hope mission because he dreamed of seeing Mars breathe. Tonight he wants to see an alien stone slip past in green. His team debates cadence versus exposure, field width versus detail. He argues for wide and fast. Catch the motion first, he says, and science the details tomorrow. The vote is close. The chair picks speed. Later, much later, the man in Dubai will look at the smeared frames and feel a love for blur. He did not know he could feel. There is a student in Beijing who has never left the country, but knows the star fields over Jezero better than his own city's skyline. He isn't on the official team. He is on a forum where official and unofficial are words people use to make themselves feel larger. He reads the Namibia report and lines up the geometry and writes a post that ends with, "If Tianwen-1 turns now, we can catch the ingress." No one answers. 3 hours later, a public status page updates with a maneuver window. The student screenshots it and quietly deletes his post, as if erasing the wish will keep it from jinxing the reality. There is a night janitor in a European control center who pauses at a screen because the graph looks like a city skyline with all its windows lit. She doesn't know the units. She doesn't need to. A rectangle labeled thermal is on the good side of a line labeled do not cross, and that is enough. She moves her mop around the feet of a scientist who has forgotten she exists and thinks, without resentment, that humans are strange and sweet when they chase invisible things. And there is a backyard in Namibia where the person who took that last Earthside photo sits with a chipped mug and an ache in the shoulders that won't leave. The image traveled the world and back. The person did not. No press conference, no microphone, no credit that would register above the noise. A friend calls to ask what it felt like. The answer is not poetic. It felt like terror. It felt like not breathing while the seconds fell off the wall clock and the guiding held, and the focus did not wander and the cables did not betray. And then it felt like the quiet after a storm when you check the house and find that nothing is broken, and you can finally taste the coffee and discover it has gone cold. They laugh. They pour another cup. Elsewhere, someone with a budget spreadsheet and a headache signs off on an overtime line item that should not exist, and is glad it does. Elsewhere, a programmer fixes a race condition that only happens when the downlink arrives in 2 bursts, separated by exactly 43 seconds. Elsewhere, a person edits a paragraph and removes the clever sentence because clever is not the point. Elsewhere, 2 people who disagree about almost everything agree to publish their data at the same time, so that neither can be accused of stealing thunder. Elsewhere, a young reporter writes a draft full of superlatives and an older editor removes most of them and leaves one in the headline. Because headlines are where compromises live. The story grows extra branches the way trees do when the wind finds them. Someone proposes that the shells are interference patterns between alternating jets. Someone else models grain charging that self-sorts particles by size into rings that look like order, and are mostly accident. A third person whispers, half joking, that maybe the thing is wrapped in fields like a slow magnetized seed. The best of these ideas are extravagant and almost wrong. The worst are boring and entirely wrong. The truth will be patient and small at first, as it always is. By late November, the world has turned its attention, as it always does, to other urgencies. The teams do not. The raw memory of geometry's gift has not faded enough to allow complacency. Drafts circulate. A figure appears with an x-axis labeled time since close approach, and a y-axis that tries to carry too much meaning. Someone shows how the Namibia baseline locks the Martian data into a shape that does not allow for a hidden flare. Someone else shows how Juice's whisper maps onto the outbound curve like a tired but faithful echo. The figure is not beautiful. It does not need to be. It does the job of figures. It allows belief without asking for trust. If you ask the people who were there what they remember most, some will say the data, the way the streak came out of chaos and sat there arrogant and inevitable. Some will say the fear, the taste of metal in the mouth when a pointing command went through with seconds left on the timer, and the star tracker did what it was born to do. A few will say the kindness, the way a rival shared a calibration file, the way a stranger answered a question at 2 a.m, with the gentleness you reserve for someone holding something fragile, the way the field remembered for a heartbeat, that the sky is big enough for all of us. When you look back at October 3rd, 2025, the moment is so sharp you could cut yourself on it. The sun stood in the doorway. Earth blinked. Mars watched. We borrowed the view. We did not waste it. That is the whole story, and 1,000 smaller ones. That is the hook and the lesson and the sequel in one breath. When the window is not yours, knock anyway. And when the neighbor opens it, say thank you, and when you leave, close it gently behind you so it will open again. The whisper begins again. You know better now than to confuse quiet with absence. You know better than to mistake patience for surrender. Somewhere a new trajectory is baking into certainty. Somewhere the geometry is loading spring-like into another cruel kindness. Somewhere a future you is about to sit up in bed because a plot bent where it shouldn't, and a green note sang a familiar word. Now, and you will gather your team, and you will bend your rules, and you will clean your data until the unknown has nowhere left to hide, and you will be ready even if you aren't, especially if you aren't.